Global civilian protection and escalation risks in contemporary conflict. My name is Emmanuel Mihingo Kaya. Distinguished participants, colleagues, and fellow contributors to this important dialogue, I address you today from a clear analytical position that the crisis we are witnessing across the world cannot be adequately understood through traditional, state-centric notions of security alone. The concept of human security, advanced by the United Nations Development Programme in 1994, compels us to shift our focus from the protection of borders to the protection of people, anchored on the principles of freedom from fear and freedom from want. Yet the empirical reality before us reveals a profound contradiction. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 114 million people are forcibly displaced worldwide. At the same time, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimates that over 300 million individuals require humanitarian assistance. These are not isolated crises. They are indicators of a global system under structural strain. Distinguished colleagues, modern warfare has undergone a fundamental transformation in the early 20th century. Civilians accounted for approximately 10 to 15% of war casualties. Today, that figure has risen dramatically to 80 to 90%. Civilians are no longer incidental victims of war, they are just primary targets and casualties. We see this clearly in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where tens of thousands of civilians have been killed and critical infrastructure systematically destroyed. In the Gaza Strip, recent escalations have displaced over 80% of the population, effectively erasing the distinction between civilian space and battlefield. In Sudan conflict, it has forced more than 8 million people from their homes within a single year. Equally alarming is the systemic targeting of survival systems. The World Health Organization reports that over half of attacks on healthcare facilities occur in conflict settings. When hospitals become targets, war ceases to be a temporary disruption and becomes a sustained condition of human insecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, conflict today is not only fought with weapons, it is increasingly prosecuted through economic instruments, sanctions, trade disruptions, and financial restrictions. While these are not often framed as non-violent tools, their consequences are deeply human. In 2022, global wheat prices increased by 30 to 40%, contributing to widespread food insecurity. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, 735 million people faced chronic hunger in 2023. Energy prices also surged, rising by over 50% in some regions, triggering inflation that affected households far beyond conflict zones. Critical global choke points, such as the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil supply passes, the Black Sea grain corridor, demonstrate how localized disruptions can generate global consequences. The implication is very clear for us. Economic measures are not neutral. They are integral components of modern conflict with far-reaching civilian impacts. Distinguished participants, perhaps the most serious risk we face today is the reemergence of nuclear danger. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates that there are approximately 12,500 nuclear warheads globally, or even more than that, I would like to believe, with over 9,500 in military stockpiles and more than 2,000 on high operational alert. Scientific modeling shows that even a limited nuclear exchange of about 100, Hiroshima-sized weapons could result in tens of millions of immediate death and reduce global agricultural output by 20 to 40% due to climatic effects, often referred to as nuclear winter. This would place billions at risk of food insecurity. At the same time, stabilizing frameworks such as the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and New START are weakening. The question before us is not whether nuclear war is acceptable. To be frank, the question is universally rejected, but whether current geopolitical dynamics are increasing its probability. Colleagues, these realities expose a deeper issue, a crisis in global governance. The United Nations, operating under the United Nations Charter, retains a mandate to maintain international peace and security. However, its effectiveness is increasingly constrained by structural limitations, including the frequent use of veto power within Security Council and inconsistent enforcement of international norms. This is not a failure of intent, but a reflection of competing national interests and institutional inertia in a rapidly evolving multipolar system. The task before us is not to abandon multilateralism, but to reform and strengthen it. In this context, civic actors and transnational networks play a critical role. History demonstrates their impact. The anti-apartheid movement helped dismantle an unjust system, and sustained advocacy contributed to the adoption of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. However, their effectiveness depends on credibility, on evidence-based analysis, coherence, and adherence to universal principles. Distinguished participants, allow me to conclude. We are confronted with a global condition in which over 114 million people are displaced. Over 300 million require humanitarian assistance. Civilians constitute up to 90% of war casualties, and over 200 nuclear weapons remain on high alert. This is not sustainable equilibrium. The path forward requires a recalibration of our priorities. We must reinforce international humanitarian law, evaluate economic policy through their human impact, revitalize arms control frameworks, and strengthen both institutional and civic accountability. Ultimately, the legitimacy of any system, national or international, rests on a single fundamental criteria: its capacity to preserve human life. Where that capacity is insufficient, reform is not optional, it is imperative. Thank you so much. I remain Emmanuel Mihingo Kaya, and today's address has been primarily focused on global civilian protection and escalation risks in contemporary conflict. Thank you so much.